Today in Biel we had 3 very long games, so I'm just going to give you little snippets actually from all 3 of them. Let's start with the clash of the top 2 players, Liren against Etienne Vachier-Lagrave. Liren gradually gained control in this game, and after move 40, the time control, it looked like he had a winning position. So he has 1 extra pawn in this rook and pawn endgame, and this is a very typical kind of position where you have the rook stationed behind the pawn, and well, the rook can barely move, and if black takes the pawn, then white will get a winning king and pawn ending. The king comes in and just takes the pawns. So clearly that wouldn't be the best approach for Vachier. Instead, he waited with king d6. Oops, excuse me, not that one. Instead, he waited with king d6. So this prevents white's king from shuffling over here. Now, at first glance, I would say this position is completely winning for white. The standard technique is you force black back and you come in with the king, or you gain entry to the king side and manage to take pawns here. But it's incredible that it really isn't easy for white at all. Well, let's see what happened. First of all, if you wait here, in this case, black can take this pawn, and in this case, the king blocks out the white king. So let's go back. So Ding tried to just kind of shuffle around a bit and see whether he'd get anywhere. So the king came back. And now there's a simple threat to take the pawn. So the rook came back again. And Vachier came back. Okay, so white has gained nothing. Now rook h4, here's a tricky move. If black defends the pawn like this, then the rook shuttles back to c4. Now the king and pawn ending is clearly losing because the king goes in. But here anyway, if black waits, then this is a very, very simple win now. We just come in here. So rook h6, clearly not a good move. However, black can play king e7, and if rook takes pawn, then king f7, and on the next turn black plays rook takes pawn and draws the game. Because 2 versus 1 on the same side, it's a theoretically drawn ending. So let's go back. So after king e7, rook g4 was played. Again, a very tricky move indeed, probing. If king f7, then we shuttle back, and in this case, white is winning. Let's take a look. You can see how narrow the margin is between the win and the draw. In this case, white is winning. The king and pawn ending will be a win because the king will come in, and in this case, black is in Zugzwang. Eventually, the pawn moves run out on the king side. Well, you can just wait very, very easily. Let's say here, 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 and now, well, black is in Zugzwang. If the king moves, then the king comes in, and, well, we're going to force the pawn home. So in this position, there's only one move for black, and that's to play g6 check. Now it looks as though white has made huge progress here, because now there's a route in for the king. Now you have lost the pawn, but the king has come in. Vachier defended so well. At first I thought he was just losing this. For example, if the king comes forward, then we check. Okay, the rook comes back to defend the pawns just for the moment. Now black can only wait here. And now we advance the pawns. Let's say black waits, g5. And now white's rook comes in on the 8th rank. And you switch round here and you're going to take on h7. And white is winning. But Vachier found a remarkable defence. He went passive. He played the king back, which looks disastrous, but in fact there is a really subtle way to draw this position. Now watch what happens. So the rook comes across, and the threat again is to play rook check and then encircle the king and take on h7. So this next move is forced. And now it looks as though white is winning very easily by playing this move, and then if he can play g5, then rook h7 and you come in and take these pawns. But just in time, black has a remarkable defence. He plays g5 himself. And this gives the black rook checking distance, gives room to check the king, and basically here the king eventually has to come back, and then in this position the king will find some stability, and again 2 against 1 on the same side is a draw. So Ding tried rook a7 here, but now the rook counterattacks, and this is good enough for a draw. Well, even this is tricky. But actually, if the king remains on f8, then the king on h7 just doesn't get out. So for example here, and this is the game continuation. And in this position they actually agree to draw. If the king remains on f8 and f7, there's nothing to do. So for example, king h8, black just waits. There's nothing to do. You can't force this one out of the way, the king out of the way. So it's just a draw. I thought Vachier defended absolutely brilliantly, and Ding Liren tried very hard, but no win. So that game was a draw. Well, let's have a quick look at the game between Vachier-Lagrave and Vishy. Vachier-Lagrave played a really, really nice game, but almost messed it up. They reached this position, another rook and pawn ending. This is good practice for us. You can see that the black king is cut off by the rook. The black king needs to cross and get in front of the pawn, and then, in most cases, it's a draw. But with the rook here cutting off the king, this makes a massive difference. However, white still has to tread very carefully indeed. Now, one would have thought that if you just shuffled the king and pawn forward, then black is going to have to give up the rook. But watch what happens. If you carelessly throw the pawn forward, then comes rook d8. In this case, the king and pawn ending is a draw. The king gets in front of the pawn. Or, after rook d8, if the rook moves away, then the black king is able to travel over and get in front of the pawn. Should be a draw. So in this position, white has to play carefully. In fact, well, it is a win. King e4 wins. And now you can see if rook d8 here, this is very different. This king and pawn ending is winning. Now you have to get the right move. If you play king e5, king e7 gains the opposition, that's a draw. But instead, well, the only winning move here is king f5. And this wins, for example, and so on. And if the rook checks, this is another very important variation. In fact, white's rook stands perfectly on d4 because it guards the pawn. It means when the rook checks, there's not a problem because the pawn is guarded. Otherwise it would be a draw. So for example, when the rook comes here, you can come back with the king and then advance the pawn. Nepomniachtchi tried king c6, but, well, this is a very simple win actually, when you know how. The game ended like this, and this is an important move. That means that the rook can interpose here after the checks, and in this position black resigned. I mean, now there really is nothing to prevent the king and pawn advancing, and you can see the king is in absolutely the worst position on c6. So Vachier-Lagrave wins. And let me just show you the third game, or of just one tiny extract from the third game between Alexander Morozenko and Richard Rapport. Now Rapport, on his free day, played in the Blitz tournament here. He wasn't obliged to, but he said, well, he felt like it was the only way he was going to win a game. And you might be mistaken if you thought that, that he was still playing a Blitz game here. He found some extraordinary moves to try and attack Morozenko. Morozenko with the white here is gradually gaining control. You know, he's coming in with the knight, the bishop doesn't look very good on d6, and the queen is starting to munch some pawns over here. Rapport found an extraordinary idea that came so close to saving the game. He found queen g4, well, the knight comes across to cover all these squares, and it looks as though nothing is doing for black. But Rapport found g5, an incredible move. This pawn can be taken in 3 different ways. So easy to go wrong here. Morozenko was under pressure. He was very short on time. Let's look at some of the alternatives. Okay, first of all, h takes. Well, now h4 stirs things up. If pawn takes, then f4 will fall. And if knight takes again, bishop takes f4. And, well, white might be okay here, but this is tricky to handle. What else have we got? F takes, well, loses actually to bishop takes pawn check. Morozenko tried knight takes g4, but he still had to face bishop f4, which looks very, very scary. In fact, white is okay, but you have to tread so carefully here. It reminds me of one of those Indiana Jones films where he's treading on these stones, and if he gets it wrong, he plunges to his doom. Well, it's a bit like white's king here. If he gets it wrong, you know, it's a disaster. But with precise play, you can be okay. So, for example, if the king comes to g2, then there are still checks here. Or if the king comes to g1, there's queen g3 check. But king f1 is correct. I think the only move that gives white chances. And after this check, you have to bring the knight back. And white, just for a moment, has found security. Even after king h8, this was a very, very tricky game to win. But with precision, Morozenko achieved it. But very nice try from Rapport. So there we go, Morozenko eventually won. So after 7 rounds, the standings are Bacro and Ding are in first and second places. Bacro has 11 points, Ding 10. Morozenko and Vachier-Lagrave also on 10. And at the bottom, Nepomniachtchi with 5 and Rapport with 4. Thanks for watching.